This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Forget the frustration of picking commerce platforms when you switch your business to Shopify, the global commerce platform that supercharges your selling wherever you sell. With Shopify, you'll harness the same intuitive features, trusted apps, and powerful analytics used by the world's leading brands. Sign up today for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/tech, all lowercase. That's shopify.com/tech.
We all have a chance to do different, to do better every single moment that we wake up, every single interaction we have, every single word that we say is a chance to turn the page, break a cycle, and ultimately it's us together, me, you, your vibrant community, and beyond. It's us together who can fight for and imagine a better world in which more human beings are loved, not for who they should be, but for who they are.
Welcome to the Parent Footprint Podcast with Dr. Dan. I am Dr. Dan, your host, and let me tell you a little bit about our mission at Parent Footprint. Our mission is to make the world a more loving and compassionate place, one parent and one child at a time. We believe the key to raising happy, healthy, and engaged kids is for us parents to seek the same in our own lives: happiness, health, and engagement. Further, and most importantly, we believe that awareness is the foundation for your vision of successful parenting. And with increased awareness and intention, we can be purposeful about leaving a healthy footprint on our children. Today's show is called Normal Sucks: How to Live, Learn, and Thrive Outside the Lines with Jonathan Mooney. I'm so fired up to have Jonathan back on the show. We did what we thought was a very meaningful show a few years back called No More Shame: The Power of Living and Learning Differently, which is to be continued with his latest book and extensive life experiences. Jonathan's work has been featured in the New York Times, the Los Angeles Times, the Chicago Tribune, USA Today, HBO, NPR, ABC News, New York Magazine, the Washington Post, and the Boston Globe, and he continues to speak all across the nation about neurological and physical diversity, inspiring those who live with differences and advocating for change. His books include The Short Bus and Learning Outside the Lines. And of course, today we are focusing on his latest book, Normal Sucks. Jonathan, welcome back, my friend.
Yeah, brother. Thanks so much for not just having me, but more importantly, doing the good work you do out in the world. I'm a big fan.
The feeling is mutual. And I've been thinking about this. We've been talking about doing the show for a long time, so I've been spending a lot of time thinking about it, and that's led me to the awareness. I don't even know where to start. So let's start with what comes to you first when this notion of normal sucks.
Well, I mean, first of all, what a subtle title is what comes to me first. It's kind of you're not supposed to say this if you're an author, but you don't even really need to read the book. The title kind of says it all.
This is the Cliff Notes we've all been looking for. Just the title, and we're done. Yeah.
Done. 2 words. Yeah. That's all you got to know. And in all seriousness, it is kind of that simple. But like anything that on the surface seems simple, when you dig a little deeper, it's much more complicated and challenging than we think. This idea of a normal kind of looms over all of us. There's a philosopher I admire named Michel Foucault who said that the judges of normality are ever present everywhere, and that we're in the society of the doctor judge, teacher judge, social worker judge, and it's on their judgment that we base our value as human beings. And I think that that is profoundly true. I think we judge ourselves based on our ability to meet a set of artificial and cultural norms about our brains and bodies. And then I think at times our children are judged by their ability to meet those arbitrary and fictional standards, and not only judged, but deeply wounded. So I went on a mission to try to understand the origins of that idea, and more importantly, what we can do about it as parents, as educators, as professionals, and ultimately as a world.
And the big question, what did you find, Jonathan? What can we do?
You're keeping these pretty broad, brother.
I know I'm gonna bring it down soon, but it's just like I'm just going with it. I'm going with it.
Just throw the big existential ones out there.
Yes, these are the big ones.
Right at me. Well, first, normal has a history, not a history of discovery, as we like to think, but a history of invention. It's not like oxygen that we find out exists and is sort of universally true. It's a construct that we've created. It's a construct that emerged in the mid 19th century. It emerged within the context of standardization and industrialization, and specifically the rise of statistical thought as a way to apply averages to social problems and try to norm the population. And it was put to really nefarious usages. It was embedded in our public health discourse. It was embedded in our built environment, in the way that architecture designed buildings, in the way that clothes were manufactured. The whole notion of a medium size is the medium of a distribution curve coming from statistics. And it was embedded in our education approaches, in our schooling, sort of valuing the mythical middle of that bell curve at the expense of anyone who deviated from it. And ultimately, it was put to use to try to rid the world of so-called defectives in the eugenics era. This is a little-known history. I'm not sure why we don't talk enough about this as a culture, especially as we wrestle with being more inclusive and equitable and just in our present moment. But in the 1920s, 30s, and 40s and beyond, there was a movement of scientists, reputable charitable foundations, the U.S. government, to eliminate, their word, defectives from our population. That included marriage restrictions, included forced sterilization, and ultimately included plans for, again, their word, extermination through institutionalization and other means. So it's got a really deep cultural history, and we need to unearth that. We need to name it, and we need to understand that that doesn't have to be the way that we think about ourselves, the way that we think about others. There's something we can do about that.
You have some personal experience with this classification system and being compared to normal, which drives a lot of your work and passion.
Yeah, it's the center of what this is all about. I remember when I was, in third grade, thereabouts, I went through a whole set of testing because I had struggled in school. I was the kid who didn't sit still, spent a lot of the day chilling out with the janitor, was the kid who struggled with reading, spent a lot of the day hiding in the bathroom to escape reading out loud. And when me and my mom were finally called into the school psychologist's office, it was literally like somebody had died. It was like we were getting the test results back, and there was, soft jazz music playing in the background. There was a box of tissues on the table. all the mirrors were covered because we were there to sit Shiva for the death of my normality, and we treat different as deficient, and we pathologize a whole continuum of differences and call them deficiencies, sicknesses, etc. And subsequently, the message for those folks is that they're not just not normal, but abnormal. And that's a really important distinction because in the arc of normal as a social construct, it was built on the backs of classifying whole swaths of human beings as abnormal and pathologizing those human beings. And I really mean whole swaths of human beings. Obviously, folks with atypical brains and bodies were sort of ground zero of both the eugenics movement and also of classifying humans as abnormal. And by the way, abnormal is not value neutral. You look it up in the dictionary and it means to deviate in an unhealthy way. And I'm quoting from a dictionary definition. And then women were classified as abnormal, and whole groups of minorities all around the world were called abnormal, deficient, and a sort of medical power surrounded them. Now, that's not to say that I didn't have legitimate challenges. I certainly did, very specific challenges with reading and sitting still. But it is to say that those challenges didn't have to be inherent deficiencies. And really, what I struggled with more than anything wasn't the challenges, the reading, the spelling, the sitting still. Really, what I struggled with existentially was being made to feel deficient as a human being. And that's the struggle that I hear all around the country over 20 years from young folks and beyond, the idea that their differences make them deficient. And that's what I'm trying to change.
And that's so key. In my office, people say, what should we focus on? And the first thing I often say is getting the light back on or keeping the light on in your child's eyes, right? It's how that they feel they matter, that they feel they have purpose, that they feel they are capable. And so often, unfortunately, because they are not fitting in and because they are struggling, they are feeling all of the opposites of what we want them to feel like.
Yeah, absolutely. That is the first step, both in my own sort of internal journey. I told you briefly about that meeting where the testing results came back, and Jonathan was dyslexic, and I was, ADD. And I remember leaving that office and turning to my mom and saying, "Hey, Mom, am I normal?" And my mom, said, "Normal sucks," and that's the origin of both the title of the book, but more importantly, the beginning of resistance and the beginning of healing, because that is a message and was a message for me of being loved not for who I should be, but being loved for who I am. And my mom even took it even further. It was about getting that light back on. And she was a ferocious advocate for me in many different contexts, in many different ways. But it was ultimately her advocating to change the environment around me and not the kid. She was an advocate way before these terms were used for accommodations. She was an advocate for changing the context and not the person, not making the round peg, square peg fit the round hole. She thought that every single shape of peg had value as they were, and it was our moral and ethical obligation as institutions to change the environment to fit the multitudes of human beings that we know are paradoxically normal.
So this runs the idea of labels, and the labels that you got and the labels that my kids got, the labels that I think I would have been maybe helped with if I got, which leads to this, is like there's this fine line between classifying people and labeling them and helping them understand why they think and do as they do so they can understand themselves in order to not only survive but thrive, right? And gosh, we our center, what I've been doing for years is helping to label and classify, and yet struggling because it's like, should we do it? How should we do it? How do we make this helpful? I mean, so I struggle with that daily. And you have a lot to say about this.
Yeah, I wrestle with it too. I mean, look, it is better to be dyslexic than stupid in terms of your own
Exactly.
self-concept.
Exactly. Right.
It's better to be, ADD than it is to be crazy or bad. So there is a lot of healing and transformation in, reframing states of being that had historically been moralized. In the arc of this work, we spent a lot of human history moralizing these things as character flaws. And there was, it was a huge step forward to replace moralization with seeing it through the lens of biology, seeing it through the lens of for lack of a better word, pathology. That was a step forward. But the problem is that we kind of get, trapped in that because to pathologize oneself to get your individual needs met seems a little bit like the sort of deal with the devil. And I've spent a lot of time thinking about, does somebody have learning disabilities? Does somebody have a disability? Are they a person with a disability? And where I've sort of landed on that is I think people experience disability in context that are built for the myth of the same. And that sounds maybe a little bit like sort of, shuffling deck chairs on the Titanic, distinction without a difference. But it does matter because when we say somebody experiences a learning disability, attentional disability, it puts the onus on the interaction between person and context. And then it helps us understand that there are biological predispositions for certain behaviors. There are contexts in which those biological predispositions are shamed and marginalized. But it raises the question of, well, maybe the context should change and not the person. So I think our future is to, name clearly without pathologizing the continuum of human experiences. I think it's more helpful to kind of go beyond the sort of label and say, well, Jonathan struggles with reading, not because he's dumb, but because not every brain is wired to read. Or Jonathan struggled with anxiety, which I did deeply, because anxiety is a part of the continuum of human experiences, and in some ways has played a evolutionary advantageous role in the advancement of the human species. Or Jonathan struggles with depression or autism or whatever that may be. All of those things have existed for a long time. And those predispositions to feel anxious, have intense moods, to struggle with reading, to have a hard time sitting still. Let's name those. Let's name those as biologically based. Let's name those as things to work on. But then let's also say it's the environment that disables, not intrinsic to the kid. And let's start thinking about things we can do for individual children, of course, to manage some of those neurodiversities in their own life. But let's ultimately start talking about what environments can do to be places that don't just work for some humans, but ultimately work for all people.
Absolutely. And you've spent a lot of time in a lot of places of the country consulting on these environments, both in the classroom school setting and also in the workplace. What have you found are the characteristics of the environments that are successful in doing what you're proposing?
I'll give you a couple tactical things, and then I'll give you the overarching core value that I think is a prerequisite for doing this kind of work. From a tactical perspective, um, active learning, active working. This whole notion that human beings are at their optimal sitting still at a desk in any context, school or work, is just blatantly false. You know the neuroscience research better than I do. All a listener has to do is pick up the beautiful revolutionary book by John Rady called Spark as a starting point. We're not wired to sit still all day long. That's not what helped us survive the savannah. It's just not, it doesn't work for us, So places that really embrace that are doing right by the neurodiverse. Providing multiple ways to get information. For me, back in the day, it was books on tape. Thing was so big. You had to put it into a backpack and plug it into a generator, but now we got the world's information in digital format, so we can do text to speech and speech to text. Just making that a core commitment for any human to have the right to get information and share information in different formats matters a lot. And then ultimately, beyond the tactical things of active learning and multiple modes for getting and showing information, really the bottom line of inclusive environments for people with atypical brains and bodies is inclusive environments have to elevate this conversation away from sort of compliance with either the ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act, or the IDEA. And they have to really shift the conversation away from, special services for those people with problems to a bigger conversation about diversity. One of the things that I am most concerned about is we do not include in corporate diversity policies and also in many localized diversity statements people with atypical brains and bodies. We don't include disability in our diversity initiatives. Give you a good example of that. My alma mater went to Brown University, deep commitment to inclusion, did a whole institutional audit about diversity on campus, spent a ton of money on the audit, spent a ton of money on remedying the findings, a 200-page report plus, and the word disability in this conversation around diversity was mentioned 0 times. So inclusive environments have to elevate the experience of people with atypical brains and bodies to the conversation around diversity, the conversation around inclusion, the conversation around equity, and ultimately a conversation around social justice. Because for too long, we put the problem in the person, and the problem's not in the person with differences. It's in the social context around them. And talking about this as a diversity issue is a way for us to reframe, reorient, and ultimately change environments and systems to be more inclusive for all people.
Amen, brother. Do you guys all get that? Did everyone get that? The problem is not in the person, it is in the context, right? And we're always focusing on the person rather than understanding the person in the context and fixing and altering and changing the context to be maximally beneficial to all types of human beings. Okay. A lot of parents listening. What do you say? What advice do you have for parents of neurodiverse children, teenagers, individuals?
First, we have to have a balanced view of, the people that we love. And this is for parents and their children. This is for, frankly, I think, any of us in any relationship with the neurodiverse. And I say balance because right now we're sort of out of balance. There's a deficit model that surrounds the experience of young people with different brains and bodies. It's deeply ingrained in our language, and it's deeply ingrained in our processes and procedures. When I was a kid, I had an IEP. And for those listeners who don't know an IEP, it's called an individualized education plan. Got to be real about that thing. NSA, KGB got nothing on the IEP. They have been doing deep intel on me my whole life. Flying unmanned drone missions over my house, and it is not,
Unsuccessful
yeah,
as it may be. Yes.
it is not good news in that file, and it's a deficit document. There's a good friend of mine, mentor of mine named Thomas Ayer, who is the former Secretary of Special Education at the U.S. Department of Education, now a professor at Harvard. He's done research on these files, and his research shows that it's relentlessly deficit oriented. At times, for every one strength that's mentioned in a diagnosis, psychological assessment, response to intervention, whatever you want to call it, there are 25 weaknesses. And nobody thrives when we have a deficit view of them. And so we got to flip that script. We got to be relentlessly committed to what is right. We have to be relentlessly committed to naming and celebrating the good in our children, in our spouses, in our coworkers, and in the person that we meet on the street. It has to be a moral and ethical commitment to the idea that everybody has something right with them, and everybody has a right to have an asset-based identity, and to have the world see the good in them and not just the bad.
So, what do you wish you heard? What did you wish someone? Now, first of all, knowing you as I do, and having heard you tell stories about your mom and what an avid advocate and just kick-ass bodyguard she always was for you. She told you a lot of very important messages. So I guess this is a two-part question. What did she tell you that you just held on to? And what is also something that you wish you could have heard from a caring adult?
Well, my mom, as you mentioned, kind of kick-ass advocate bodyguard is the right word. She wasn't a tall woman. She was like 4'11", on a good day, in high heels on her tippy toes. And she has a very funny, squeaky voice like Minnie Mouse. And she curses like a truck driver, And if you were somebody doing wrong by her son, you did not want cursing Minnie Mouse in your office, But that's where she was, and we knew she was there because every dog in the neighborhood was running away, only bats could hear her high pitched obscenities. And the message my mom gave me was, you're not the problem, she said that, she lived that, she embodied that. The problem is the narrow definition of learning. The problem is the school desk. The problem is the reading groups. The problem is a narrow definition of intelligence that leaves so many people out. The problem is a set of institutional practices. And that really, saved me. I struggled. I don't want listeners to think that it was a clear path to being a writer, being an advocate, going to Brown University. I had a plan for suicide when I was 12 years old. I left school for a time when I was in sixth grade. But what really kept a fragile and tenuous sense of self from breaking entirely was that core belief that you're not the problem. Now, something I wish I would have heard. It was said to me by my mom, but I didn't hear it. And this goes to your latter question. Something I wish I would have been given from a different meaningful adult in my life. Because, you get to the point, and I'm sure many of your listeners may be at this point, where, you're a parent, you're a mom or dad, you're a caregiver, and you're like the Peanuts character. You know what I mean? It's like it's like wah wah wah, and
Right.
and kids don't listen. And this is the essential role that other meaningful adults can play, is to be a voice that's coming outside of that bodyguard, outside of that safe and nurturing space. And sometimes in your journey, that voice has even more credibility. So I wish I would have heard from somebody like that I had a right to be angry at what was happening to me.
Mm.
And that's a really important point. Like I'm asked all the time by parents, caregivers, say, hey, look, there's all these accommodations for my kid, and my kid's in high school, but my kid won't use them. And that's a very, very common phenomenon, right? And the origin of that phenomena is one, often these accommodations are given in a stigmatizing way. So why, if you're 16, would you self-select to identify yourself as somebody with a quote unquote problem? And the other origin of that is the accommodations are presented as a way to fix you, opposed to changing the environment that was not built for you. That, again, is a really important distinction. And so I wish I would have heard, hey, you know what? You have a right to be pissed, not at yourself, but for what happened. It's not cool that somebody chills out with the janitor in the hallway. That's not all right. It's not all right that somebody is bullied because they don't make eye contact when they play on the playground. That's not all right. And that's not just a tragedy. It's actually a crime that people with neurodiversities are exceedingly marginalized in our society. And the way to react to that is not with charity, not with sympathy, but ultimately with anger. To say, you know what, that's an injustice. And we should fight against that injustice. And individuals should be angry, not at themselves, but at that injustice. A good friend of mine, amazing writer, poet, activist, that all your listeners should check out. His name is Roberto Rivera. He likes to say, because he had a very similar experience to mine, he likes to say that you should take your pain and turn it into propane, to turn it into fuel, right? To fight against that injustice. And I think I could have heard that much earlier in my life than I did.
Yeah, validating those feelings of hurt, of anger, of injustice, I think is so huge, and totally agree. How many times I've heard in my office and in my own house, like, I'm not going to do that. I'm not taking that accommodation. Like why would we want to stand out as needing something more because it's framed as there's something wrong with us and we're deficient?
Yeah,
makes perfect sense. Okay, we're almost to the parent footprint moment question, but I'm going to ask you the one thing question first. One thing, parents, particularly parents of neurodiverse children, often are dealing with a lot, and it can be overwhelming, and life is busy, and there are a lot of stressors going on in our world today, and everyone's doing their best. If they were going to do one thing and start that one thing today, what would you suggest they do?
Focus on what's right. To have a conversation at the dinner table, before drop off, after school, at bedtime, that just relentlessly flips the deficit model. Nice. To talk about the good that they see in their child, and to commit every day to talking about 3 good things before the one bad thing, and to getting balance back into the way that the neurodiverse see themselves, because everybody has something right with them. And the path to thriving is not fixing what's wrong with you, but scaling, building, and celebrating what's right with you.
Yes. Okay. Focus on what is right. That leads us to the parent footprint moment question, which you have been waiting for. Okay, Jonathan, tell us about a time when you became aware of yourself as an individual or as a parent, and that new awareness had a positive impact on your child.
Me and my father did not get along. My father was somebody that I always thought was ashamed of me. He was the "what's wrong with you? Why don't you sit still? Why don't you do better in school?" And my father was also a an alcoholic for my entire childhood and a substance abuser of many forms, and brought a lot of chaos into the house. Multiple bankruptcies, precarious financial situation throughout all of my childhood. And subsequently, that chaos and that sense of shame fractured our relationship. And so I went through a period of at least 5 or 6 years recently in which I did not talk with him, speak with him, in which he did not have any interaction with my 3 children. And about 6 months ago, we reconnected, and I came to understand 2 things. One, that the fruit doesn't fall far from the tree, and what I mean by that is my father was shamed for his differences. My father had his ears taped back on his head because they were too big. My father grew up in a very Irish immigrant Catholic household and had a nun named Sister Payne. My father was consistently made to feel ashamed of who he was, and subsequently perpetuated that cycle, which is a cycle that neurodiverse moms and dads and caregivers are often caught in. And my father, he lost a lot of his life to that shame. And I wish I could say that we had a um, mea culpa moment, and we kind of sat and hashed it all out, but we really didn't, you know. Um, but what I learned in that moment that I will carry with me as an individual and as a parent, both, is that I can forgive. You know, I can forgive. Um, I can have empathy. It doesn't excuse behavior, but it means that uh, cycle can end with me, and that's a choice that I can make and will continue to make for the rest of my life.
That's awesome, Jonathan. I'm taken. I'm glad you had that moment with him, and cannot begin to imagine the complexity of emotions and beyond in that reunification, so to speak. But the biggest thing that you mention here, among the biggest things you mention, is forgiveness, like awareness and forgiveness, which does not mean excusing, and how hard it is for people to get to a place where they have been wronged and they have been hurt, abused, and to come to a place of acceptance and forgiveness to allow freedom and health to be unchained to those, to be able to do it differently in their own lives and in their lives as parents to their children. Thank you.
Hey Dan, I so appreciate you, man, and I appreciate everything that you're about, because we all have a chance to do different, to do better every single moment that we wake up, every single interaction we have, every single word that we say is a chance to turn the page, break a cycle, and ultimately it's us together, me, you, your vibrant community, and beyond, It's us together who can fight for and imagine a better world in which more human beings are loved, not for who they should be, but for who they are.
I couldn't have said it any better. I usually wrap up with some quotes from the guest, and you just said it. You just said it, Jonathan. And grateful for the work you're doing, and you really are. You're a missionary. You're out there. I wish you I wish you less travel along the way, and know that it is a necessary part of spreading the important word. I will say that parents listening. The simple, because Jonathan and I like things simple, is the statements of "you're not the problem" and focusing on what is right are just key guiding principles to share with our neurodiverse kids and actually all the humans in our life. Jonathan, tell people where they could find the book, their blogs. There's a documentary. You got lots of stuff. Where can people track you?
Yeah, you can come find me on all the social stuff. It's just the Jonathan Mooney on all the different social platforms. And then folks can find information about where I'll be speaking, all the good work that I'm a part of in community and fellowship with others at jonathanmooney.com.
Very simple, people, at jonathanmooney.com. That concludes yet another very meaningful conversation with Jonathan Mooney. Thank you all for listening to our show today. Normal Sucks: How to Live, Learn, and Thrive Outside the Lines. Check us out at parentfootprint.com, www.parentfootprint.com. We have parent footprint awareness training designed to help you parent with purpose, awareness, and intention. Be the person you want your child to become, and ask yourself the same guiding question I ask you to ask yourself daily. What footprint do you want to leave?